Hello there, my lovely jewelry makers. I'm Christina at CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this fancy prong set wire work pendant. So you might remember this from a few videos ago where I showed the first pendant that I made, and I had loads of requests to do a tutorial for it, so that's what we're going to be doing today. And also, just to let you know, I will have all of these pendants available for sale in my Etsy shop. I'm going to leave a link straight to that in the description box below. Otherwise, if you want to learn how to make it, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we're going to need. First of all, I have 3 different gauges here of regular round silver coated copper wire. And the first one is a 0.8mm, so this is going to be the base wire. Next I have a 0.4mm wire here, this is going to be a weaving wire. And finally I have a 0.3mm, so this is just going to be used right at the end to attach something together. You could also easily use a 0.4mm for that, I'm just using the 0.3 just because it's just a little finer. And then of course we do need a stone as well that we want to capture. So this specific one is a rectangle, as you can see, and it measures 1 by 2.5 centimeters, but you don't have to use this specific size or shape. So this is just what I'm going to be demonstrating the technique with, but you can easily customize the technique and use it on other sizes and shapes like I said. And I will also just point out that this stone that I'm using does have a hole, if you can see it there, but I won't be using that. I will actually be covering that up, so don't worry about using a stone that has a hole. And then I just want to mention the tools that I'm going to be using. So of course we'll need the basics. I've got my wire cutters here, so these are flush cutters, and then also some chain nose, tweezer nose pliers. And then I also have a pair of flat nose pliers here. Now the reason that I'm using these as well is quite specific, because when I make prongs, like we're going to be doing for this stone here to capture it, I kind of tend to like using my pliers as a guide to make the prongs equal, the same size all the way along. So these ones here I found work really well for the stone that I'm using. So of course if you're using a different stone or something, then you might want to choose some other pliers that will work. But I find these specific ones work really well size wise, the width of them, to make just the right size prong to basically capture this stone here. So that's what I personally like to do. And these specific 3 pliers here are the Suron brand, which I use all the time, as you might have noticed in my videos. So I highly recommend having a look at them. I'm going to put links to the specific ones that I'm using in the description box down below in case you want to use the same ones. But then the last pair of pliers I have here are my 6-step bell making pliers that I also use all the time. Now, you don't really need to use this, I'm just using them to help make my bail with. So I'm just going to use probably the second smallest to help shape the bail once we've made it. But you don't really need these pliers, I'm just using them because I have them handy. You can easily use anything else. I often find crochet hooks actually work really well to create bails as well, because you have them in many different sizes. But like I said, I'm going to have links to both the materials and the tools in the description box down below, so that might be helpful. Otherwise, let's get it all together and let's get started. So to get started, I cut 2 lengths of my 0.8mm here, and these are 35 centimeters long. So do remember that the measurements that I'm giving you throughout this tutorial are to obviously suit the materials that I'm using. So this stone here, so if you're using a different size and shape, obviously you have to account for that when you cut your wires. And then as for the 0.4mm wire here, I'm just going to be working with that still attached to the reel, because we don't know exactly how much we're going to need, but also rather have less wastage. So to get started, I'm going to be grabbing my 2 lengths of the 0.8mm, so the base wires, and just make sure that they're even at the end. And then I'm literally just going to have them laying next to each other like this. Now what I'm just going to do as well is kind of just measure in from one end. And again, this is going to be specific to the materials that I'm using, or the stone. So again, this might be different obviously if you're using a different one. So what I've figured is I'm going to measure in approximately 14 centimeters. Doesn't have to be precise, but just roughly. So there, I know this is where I want to start basically weaving. Well, we're not really going to be weaving, but we want to start using the 0.4mm. So I've got my length of 0.4mm, like I said, still attached to the reel. And then what I'm going to do is place this behind the 2 0.8mm wires. I'm just going to leave a little tail, just roughly about 10 centimeters or so. And then all we're going to be doing is, like I said, we're not going to actually weave currently. I'm literally just going to wrap the 0.4mm around both lengths of 0.8mm here, making sure the 0.8mm lengths lay flat next to each other the whole time, but literally just coiling the 0.4mm around. Now what I want to make sure to do though is that the wraps are nice and tight next to each other, and also that the wraps don't overlap each other in any way. And as you can see, this kind of does move up and down the wires, so it's not too crucial if it's moving right now where in relation to where we wanted to start on the base wires, because we can just do a few wraps here. Make it nice and tight. Like I said, you can either then use some pliers to help with that, or obviously you can use your nails to kind of push things together. But then once you've done a few wraps, because obviously it'll become a little bit more stable and you have a bit more to hold on to once you've done some wraps. So let's just say that for now. I can then just take my measuring tape and just make sure I'm kind of sticking in that place where I want it to start. So I can make sure the ends are even, and I just want to measure in 14 centimeters, which looks pretty good actually, so it's not really moved too much. So I could just keep an eye on that while I continue doing this. So I wrapped a little further now, as you can see, I have a longer length, and I'm just going to continue to reference back to my stone, because what I'm doing is wrapping it long enough so it'll basically cover one side here, so go along the side of the stone, one of the sides rather. So I have a little bit to go yet, and also I'm just double checking occasionally that I'm still about 14 centimeters in, which looks pretty good. So I'm just going to keep going a bit more, because obviously I could tell that I'm just missing a bit more to reach the whole side. So basically from corner to corner. So now I wrapped a bit further, then comparing to my stone again along the side, that is pretty good. Now what I'm not doing is going 100% from corner to corner, but just almost. We can always add a bit more, a few more wraps, or obviously take some away if we need to, but this is pretty good to start out with. So what we need to do now, I'm in the position where I've reached that corner down there, and it's on the corners that I'm going to be making prongs. So we reach the point where we need to make the first prong. So to make our first prongs, I'm making sure I'm doing it where I'm also wrapping. So on this end here where the lengths are longer, because we're still going to continue to use them. And also of course I made sure that I have my wraps in the correct place from the initial ends. But then I'm just going to keep it here and kind of hold on to my wrap section, and then separate out the two base wires a bit, and then basically I'm just using the wraps themselves to basically bend my wires against, and separating them so they go out to opposite sides and straight out to the sides, basically at a 90-degree angle. Now what I like to do is just tighten up the angle a little bit, because right now you can see it's quite rounded. So I'm just going to take my flat nose pliers and just sharpen it up. And do that on both sides. You can instantly see the difference between them. And do that on the other one as well. So we have both wires coming out straight out to the side, literally opposite each other. So we're going to make a prong with either of these wires. So we're going to have prongs on both the front and the back of the piece. I then take my flat nose pliers again here. Remember, I'm using these specific ones because they create the perfect size prong for what I'm working with. But just use obviously what's going to suit yours. And I'm just going to make one prong at a time. So start on one side. Doesn't matter what side you start on, and I'm placing them basically all the way down in the corner we created, so they won't really go any further. Grab onto the wire like that. And then I'm gonna push the long end around the pliers, basically back on itself, to go down next to the other length and take it out. So this is, I've now created kind of the first shape you can see using the actual pliers themselves. Now obviously it's still quite open, so what I'm going to do is we need to just tighten this up. So here I like to kind of grab hold as close to where the prong is with my fingers as possible, and then I get this section right at the back of my pliers. I find that's the most control, and then you want to just start to squeeze it together, tighten it up as you can see. If you need to straighten it out, something a bit like that. So just keep doing that until you're happy with it. So that is basically the prong itself. Now what I want is for the wire that we're using for the prong to come back out at the same angle it originally came, because we obviously need to continue using it. So I put my pliers back on that prong just gently. I'm not squeezing tight because it will kind of probably flip then, but I'm just going to place them there because as far down as they'll go on the first side where we already have the bend, I'm going to use that as the guide to bend this length against the pliers on the opposite side here, which is then going to create it coming straight out and basically continuing in the same fashion as you can see. And we've used that as a guide, so it fits perfectly. And like before, I like to just sharpen up that corner angle on this side here. And that's now created our very first prong. So we basically have the straight length of wire continuing, we just added a prong into it along the way. Now of course, that's just the one prong, we need to do the one on the other side as well. So the exact same principle, I'm placing my plier here, as far down into that corner as it'll go. And then I'm going to take the length of wire and bend it against the pliers kind of around the side. And I'm just going to make it overlap the other side there. So again, using the pliers as the guide for the size. And then same principle, take it out and you can see it's kind of an open gap, so I just want to tighten it up. Again, put my fingers to kind of grab hold of everything, keep the most control, put the actual prong at the back of the pliers and just gently start to squeeze it, tighten it up until they're laying right next to each other. And as you can maybe see, you can still pull the wires up and down. You might find that, say, the wire that you're working with might kind of move up a bit or something. Don't worry about that, just literally push it back down, because we created these prongs now. The wraps that we've done kind of act as a stopper, so just push them all the way down till they won't go any further. So like that, and then obviously we just need our wire here to come straight back out and next to the other one to follow back in line with how they were before. So I'm placing my pliers back on, just gently, and then bending the wire against the pliers for that guide to then come and lay right next to the other one again. And of course, just straighten anything out that you need to. And I also just want to sharpen up that corner. So that when we bring them next to each other, we have our two prongs, but the wires, the base wires there, are laying next to each other again, like they were before the prongs, which then means we've added our first pair of prongs and they're laying there right opposite each other, and it looks a little something like this. Like I said, if you need to push anything down, just do that. Otherwise, these are our prongs. So if we just bring in the stone and then lay it across the side here, you can see that that prong is going to sit right on the corner. Now, because obviously it's going to sit on the corner, what I actually want to do now is also shape my wire a little bit to follow that, because we're making the frame to go all the way around. So I'm going to do that as I go here. And for that, I'm just going to take my tweezer nose pliers and chain nose pliers. And then I basically want to shape this so these lengths that I'm going to continue to work with are going to come out at a 90-degree angle this way, which means, and also obviously having these prongs sitting on the corner. So I'm placing my pliers basically on top of the prongs, and then I'm going to just bend them slightly, kind of backwards a bit. You can kind of see and imagine that those prongs are now sitting right on the corner. And then I'm just moving the pliers a little bit right next to the prongs, and then bending a little bit further until we get just a little bit more that 90-degree angle. Because if you then can imagine, do it this way, that's going to fit nicely and hug around the corner of the stone. So that's obviously the aim of getting those prongs then to sit right on that corner. And then those prongs are in place now. That means I'm going to continue working with these lengths of wire. And all we're going to do for that is continue working with a 0.4 mil there. So pick that back up. And then obviously right now it's finished just before the prongs. So all I'm going to do is make sure it comes behind the prongs, and then basically bring it to the other side of the prongs so we can continue. Same principle, just wrapping around both base wires, kind of as if they were one, but making sure they stay lined flat next to each other. So right on the other side of the prongs here, just make sure everything is nice and tight. I'm just going to start wrapping around both base wires again and start as close to the prongs as you can get. And now this part here that we're going to be wrapping is going to be, obviously this is again specific to the stone that I'm working with, but I'm now going to be wrapping what's going to be the bottom side. So obviously I'm going to account for that. So I want to wrap enough to reach the length so we can then make our prongs in the next corner over here. So again, just keep referencing back to your stone, obviously depending what you're using, so we can stop when we need to make our next prongs. So then if I just compare again here, because I think we're about there, put the stone in place, and then just, I'm not purposely going all the way to the very corner or the edge, because what I'm looking at is how it is on the first side. So you can actually see the wraps start just a little bit in from the very edge of the stone. So that means I also want to finish in the same place on this side, because the prong we're going to make is going to obviously kind of react in the same way. So you just need a little bit of space there for around the corner. But this looks like I'm pretty much ready to make the next prong. So same principle, obviously, make sure your wraps are nice and tight. We start our prongs by separating the two base wires to opposite sides, straight out like this. And don't forget, I like to just actually use the other one, sharpen up the corners there. And then we are ready to make our next two prongs in the exact same way as I showed you down here. So now these prongs are in place as well. You can see we got the bottom two corners now of the prongs, and I'm at the point now where I have the two wires going straight next to each other again. So before I continue wrapping, just double check, put the stone in place, and obviously just make sure that sizing and shape and everything works out nicely. So you can see these two prongs, I'm going to cover the bottom two corners there. And then now, I know I'm happy with that, just going to pick back up the weaving wire, bring it behind the prongs, and then just continue wrapping on this side. So of course this side is going to be the other long side opposite to where we started out. So we want, basically, to show you, now to keep wrapping, and obviously the two sides need to be the same, and we want to end up so where we end at the top is where we're going to then make the top prongs. So again, look at the bottom here where the weave, or the wrap rather, stops, and then just finish the wraps in the same place by the corners at the top. So now let's have a little look here as I've weaved, or wrapped rather, up this side as well. So just add in the stone again into position all the way down to the bottom corners there, and then I just want to see if I'm in the right place to stop wrapping. So also what you just keep in mind is that the wraps here sometimes are a little bit open, so what I like to do is just push them down to make sure to see the actual place where they stop. So you can see on this side here, this is kind of how they are when I'm not touching it, but I push them together tighter, and it kind of brings them a bit further down. So I just make sure to do that, and I think this is pretty good on both sides. So now I'm in position here to make the prongs on the top corners. So that is the exact same principle. Just start on one side, spread out the wires, make the prongs, and then you'll have these wires here come across the top towards the other wires, and then make the prongs on this side, again same principle, and then those will go towards the other side. So basically these wires now, once you're making the prongs, are going to come towards each other and more or less overlap side by side. So just do that, because then that will obviously be the top two prongs, but we'll have prongs all the way around and have the basic frame in place as well. So now I've got the top prongs in place as well. Then let's just double check. I'm going to keep doing this throughout just to make sure that everything still fits, because if it doesn't, rather fix it while you're there before moving on. So that still fits nicely inside there, and we have the frame all the way around. Now obviously the top here, this side is still open, but that's what we're going to deal with now. But that fits nicely, and as you can see, the wires from either side are kind of crossing over next to each other. So now what I want to do is just keep working on the top here, because obviously we do want that to be like the other sides, but also we need to add a bail at the top as well. So first of all, what I'm going to do is, because these base wires, the two next to each other, are still just free as they are, I do want to wrap them together a bit like we've done along the sides. So just on one side at a time, again bring the weaving wire behind the prong, and then we just want to wrap a bit here at the top as well. Now we don't want to wrap all the way here across to the other side to the opposite corner, because obviously these two kind of overlap. So what we actually want is for them to meet in the middle, not completely in the middle, but I'm going to wrap a few times here on this side just so it gets towards the midpoint, and then I'm going to flip it around and then use just the short length we have left, again bring it behind the prongs, and then wrap around these other two, just again in towards close to the midpoint. So I've now wrapped around both sides there the same amount, and then they meet roughly in the middle. Like I said, not all the way, because let me just put the stone back in. again, so we're checking that everything is still nice and how we want it to be. Just get it in place, because what we're then going to do as well is bend some wires, so we don't want the wraps there to finish literally bang up against each other. We just want a little bit of space, so a small gap, but that looks fine. And then what I want to do first of all is just the back wire from each side. I kind of just want to bend out of the way a little bit because it's the front wires we're going to use for the bail. So in this case, I'm just working with this as my front. So I'm first of all just going to take from the two wires that are next to each other here and just gently bring the back wire with a curve a bit further out. Doesn't have to be final yet. And then I just want to separate the other two, and the back wire of those also be coming towards the back now. Obviously, I just want to kind of bring this wire around because that's going to be the front, with the other one that's going to then form the bail. But these two I'm just bringing towards the back. So the back one from either side. Also just to create a bit of space so we have space to work with here, because they might get a little bit in the way otherwise. So I'm just going to kind of leave them a bit like this for now. And then we have these two front wires that are still going straight towards each other. And what I want to do is start bending them. So just don't mind the 0.4 mil lengths for now. So basically, the reason that we left a bit of space is because when we bend this wire, that's obviously going to use up some of that space. So I'm going in, place my pliers just after where my wraps end on this one. Gonna kind of bend it straight up and then backwards a little bit towards the side. Can always adjust that. The same with the other side. Place pliers and bend the wire back against itself to create that angle, because now you can then see these two are more or less going to kind of meet up with each other a bit, so we needed that space for the wires to be able to do that. And as you can then maybe tell, this is what's going to now, these two wires are going to be creating the bail. So you can just sit a little bit, maneuver these wires how you want them to be, how much of an angle between them you want, it's up to you. Again, that's going to affect how your bail looks. So just adjust that until you're happy. And then it's a matter of starting to weave the bail. And how we're going to be weaving the bail is simply using the figure-of-8 weave, so a nice and simple one. So first of all, we still have this length attached to the reel, which is also part of making sure we don't run out, because again, how you want your bail to be obviously will use different amounts, different lengths of the 0.4 mil. So when you're happy with the angle of your base wires there for the bail, then it's time to start weaving. Now what I'm just going to do is bring the wire around, because right now it's wrapping around both of those base wires. I'm just going to kind of bring it up between the two. So I'm just focusing on these front two, obviously not these back two. I'm going to leave them for now. And then it's a matter of just going to wrap around this one by itself, just to kind of bring it further up. And then the figure-of-8 weave is simply that you go around one wire here twice, you move to the other wire, and then you go around that twice, and we literally swap side to side like that, and it kind of fills in this space, this open space between the wires. So I wrapped around this by itself. I'm going to cross to the other side, And you can also, just a little hint or tip, that right at the beginning here, you want to make sure to obviously wrap the bail so it's going to still fit the stone. So what you can do to just start off is just put the stone in place, just to make sure you don't, for instance, wrap so they're too close together but you needed them to be a little bit more open, or the opposite, you wrap them open and then actually you could have wrapped them closer together, because obviously it's the stone really that determines that. So you can just kind of keep it in there just to make sure you get the first couple of wraps properly in place, and make sure that the base wires here are going to be next to each other. So that's once around the opposite base wire. Just going to take the stone out again. And like I said, it's twice. So one more time around that same base wire. I'm just using pliers as well to help push anything in place, because can't really get in there that easily with my nails, so sometimes just use the pliers. And now we need to swap back again. So I'm gonna go, it's coming down between the two, and then coming back to the first wire that I started from. Wrap around once and twice. Again, make sure to squeeze your wraps nicely closely together. Back to the opposite side, and you can see is that crossover. Obviously it's not so obvious now, but it will become more obvious. But that's what then fills in this space between the wires. So once and twice, like that, and wrap. Cross back over to the other side, and we just want to continue doing this until we reach what's going to actually be the middle of the bail. So kind of halfway we want to wrap basically. So now reached about halfway here, and this is also going to be roughly the height of the bail. Now what I want to do is, we need to obviously still weave the rest of the length, but because I'm doing it so we're starting from a narrow point and it gets gradually wider. Now, because this is the midpoint, I actually want to do the opposite. So from this widest point that's going to be, and then we want to start bringing it in again. So that means I'm just going to grab my tweezer nose pliers, and then basically bring the two base wires in towards each other again. You can see it's going to kind of finish off that shape. And then basically we're just going to continue weaving. Now this is a little bit different, because if you're familiar with weaving with wire, when you weave here, we'll just continue. What you'll find is that because this is going to be the widest point and we're going to weave towards a narrower point, the wire is going to want to kind of slip towards the narrower point naturally. So it's going to want to kind of come up like this. And obviously we want to avoid that. So just a little tip on how I kind of like to do it then is, I just do this side. So wrap from this side here, we need to cross to the other side. So I'm crossing over, and then before I start wrapping on this side here, I kind of push down on the side that I just wrapped to hold it in place while I then wrap the other side and kind of get that into place. So twice like that, and then maneuver the wire to the opposite side. Same principle, just hold it however you need to, and then push down on the side you just wrapped while then wrapping the opposite side, and obviously pushing down when you're tightening the wraps there. And that's how I kind of like to wrap when I'm doing it from a wider point to a narrow point, to try and avoid the wire slipping down and kind of getting on an even weave. But then just continue this until we've done this other half and we have the complete length of the bail. So now I'm done weaving the bail. We're actually done using the 0.4 mil here, so we can cut off the excess. So I just want to cut it off and just to leave a short little tail, just to be able to use that to finish off with. And then we have the frame in place and also the bail. Now what I'm going to be doing is shape the bail straight away. So from the side here, what I'm going to do first of all is push it forward a little bit, down from the root you could say. Then in this case, like I said, I'm just taking my 6-step bail making pliers. You can use any form of mandrel or anything you have handy. And I'm just using that second smallest. It's just to help shape it. So I'm not squeezing onto the bail. I'm just placing my plier or mandrel you have behind about the middle of the bail. And then I'm pushing the bail around the back. Continue all the way. And just look from the front, you can see it's going to end up looking something like this. And that's why I like to kind of do the graduated bails where you work from the narrow point to a wider point. It just gives a really nice finish, I think. But obviously that's personal preference. Now what I'm going to do is just take the ends here before I completely close it up and actually feed them through the frame from the back to the front. And then I've made sure as well that these wires and the bottom of the bail that is between the two other wires that are kind of going out towards the back. And then I'm going to literally just push it in between all the way, kind of close up the base of the bail there, you could see. Just smooth these two out a little bit. And then these two wires are coming out basically at the front, like that. And we also have the bail shape now. So what I just want to do then is fasten the bail in place, because you'd still be able to kind of move this and open it up for now. So that's what I'm first of all just going to use this length of the 0.4 mil that I cut off. So I'm just going to use that, just see where it's coming out from. And there we go. So it's wrapped around obviously the bail right now, but I just want to attach it to the actual frame part so the bail can't open up like this. So however you need to do that, if you have some space around the base of the bail here, just bring that through. Now I'm wrapping then this around this other wire that's coming out towards the back, which then means that I'll be attaching this end of the bail to a different part of the frame, so it's going to fasten it more. So you won't be able to basically push or pull the bottom of it open. So just wrapping it around there. And then do that a couple of times if you can. So now we're done using a 0.4 mil here when we've fastened it nicely and we're happy with it. So we can literally just get rid of them, get them out of the way. Wherever you've ended up with them, just make sure that you wrapped your 0.4 mil wire around one of the base wires somewhere a couple of times just to secure it. Then I have one wire finishing here. I'm just going to cut off the excess pretty close down. Just there's going to be just a short little length left, and that I'm going to just use my Tweezernose and basically just tuck it away just to make sure it's not sticking out and it's not going to catch or scratch on any clothes or skin. So I'm just pushing that in and away. And the same with the other one as well. Just cut off the excess. And then tuck away the end nice and securely. So now we have the frame and bail complete fully. And obviously again you can just try it if you need to. But then what we have left are these lengths of our base wire here. So we got two coming out towards the front that we brought through from the back there. And then we have the other two coming out towards the back. So these are the wires that I'm going to use to basically decorate the front and the back once we've added in the stone, of course. So we need to add in the stone using our prongs first of all before we actually do the decoration. So because we have prongs on both the front and the back to capture the stone, we need to do one side of the prongs first of all. So obviously the stone won't fall all the way through. So I'm just starting on the back here. And then what I'm going to do is obviously to start with one prong at a time. And I like to go in, again I'm using my tweezers nails to have the most specific control. I first of all place my pliers just kind of more at the tip of the prong and just gently do a little bend inwards. Not too much, but just a little bit. And then I go further down and basically start bending the whole prong in over. So it will cover the stone once the stone is in there. So you can just do a little at a time to begin with. So just do that one then. It's going to go to the opposite corner one. So do the very tip first, just a little bit. And then bring the whole prong further in. Doesn't have to be perfect just yet, because obviously we haven't got the stone in yet, so we don't know 100% how it's gonna all work together. But then do the rest of them. So the tip and then the whole prong. And you can also then adjust them a bit if they kind of seem a little bit off the angles or something from each other. You can always adjust that a little bit. The final one here, do the tip bit first and then the whole prong. That one just need to bring that in a bit more. So that's all the prongs on, in this case here, the back, bent in. Now I'm just going to add my stone and first of all see how it's all sitting, if it's still kept all its shape that we need it to, and obviously that it's going to capture it nicely. So from the front it looks pretty good, but obviously I'm just going to turn it around to the back and then just see first of all if the prongs are actually capturing the stone. Now what I can see, which is what usually probably happens, which is also the better thing to happen, just get the stone all the way in, is that some of the prongs actually don't reach all the way to the stone just yet. So maybe you can see there's a bit of air there between some of the prongs and the stone. So I know that I need to bring the prongs a little bit further down. So you can either try and do a bit while the stone is in there, but obviously the stone could be a little bit in the way. But it still doesn't have to be perfect, so just kind of get them close to the stone. The main thing is just that the stone can't fall through from the front to the back basically, because obviously we want to capture it from the front then, but if it can fall through at the back then it's kind of pointless. So that's the back done for now. I'm just going to put the stone back in. And then basically we need to capture the front. And that's the same principle now. In this case, obviously we need to leave the stone in there because that's the whole point of capturing it. So obviously we're working now with it with the stone in place, but it's the same principle. I'm going to take my tweezer nose pliers, just Just get them out of the way a little bit. And then starting on one corner, the very tip I bend in first a bit, and then I bring in the prong itself. Now obviously because the stone is there, it's a little bit in the way for the pliers, so you might have to kind of push more on the prong to bring it in towards the stone. So that's one. And then I'm going to the opposite corner. I like to kind of go to the opposite corner of the prong because it kind of works out the best, I find. So the very tip, and then I'm bringing the whole prong. And you can also push it down a little bit with your fingers. So don't worry about anything just yet. It's not going to be perfect yet. Then I have the other two prongs. Again, the very tip. And then the whole prong. I think that one I just want to maneuver a bit this way. And the final one on the bottom. The tip and then the prong. And if you can use your fingers a bit, obviously, then do that. So the stone is captured in there, in a sense. It's not going to fall out from here, but I can tell that it's still not quite perfect in with the prongs. So you'll see some of the prongs will still have, they might have on yours obviously, but there's a bit of air still between some of them, which means that the stone could move around. It might not be able to fall out, which is the main thing, but it could still move around. So I do want to avoid that. Which means what I then like to do is basically tighten up the prongs to grab onto the stone more. So I just go into start on one corner there, and I take my tweezers and pliers and press on both of the prongs at the same time, gently obviously, just enough so they basically go in and capture the stone more. So there, that prong immediately moved closer to the stone, where I couldn't really get my pliers in there before, but now I could push it close enough. And I'm just going to go around and do that with all of them, basically just tightening up the prongs. And your stone is captured in there nicely and securely with prongs on both sides. Now of course, if you just like your piece like this and you don't want to add the extra embellishment that we're going to be doing, you can always just finish off these base wires nice and neatly, and then you have just the prong set really as the main focus. So that's completely up to you, but what I'm going to do is show you kind of how you can also use these lengths to add some embellishment. And again, especially because this stone that I'm using does have a hole, so I do want to cover that so it's not going to be as obvious. So of course I'm just going to be working on one side at a time. I'm going to start with the front. It doesn't really matter, but I'm just going to start with that. So that's where we've got these two lengths of wires that I'm going to be using. So I'm kind of just going to bring them down here into position first of all, and then I just want to separate them. Now obviously if you need to smooth out any wires to make sure we don't have unwanted kinks and bends, then I'm just going to separate them out here. And again, this is just showing you how I've done it on this specific stone with this design. You can obviously play around and do your own embellishment as well. Anyway, spread out the wires, and now obviously because where I have the hole, I want to cover that up straight away. So this is where I'm then just going to kind of add some curves into the wire. So this wire, I'm looking straight at it, is coming out towards the right side. I'm then going to make sure that it kind of stays at that angle where it's coming from, and then bring it towards the left, so it's kind of adding a curve into it. going over towards the opposite side. And I want it to kind of come over the top of the hole a little bit. And just maneuver it into place. Keeping the curves and soft shapes. So just try and do that for now, and then obviously I want to do the same with the other side, but mirrored. So this is going to go to the opposite side, this is then crossing over. And basically the aim with this is where these two wires cross over is going to basically be what's going to cover the hole. And then they basically just swap sides. And that's, I would say, the starting point of it. And then just make sure that you covered that hole if you're obviously using the stone or using a stone with one. And then from here, I'm going to then start adding just basically little loops. So it's nothing fancy. So I'm making sure if I like this area up here, obviously I want to make sure that doesn't really move around if I can help it. So it will help, say, put your thumb over it while you're then moving the wire to create the next step, for instance. So I'm literally just going to use the wire itself. I'm not really going to use any tools for this if I can help it. So I want to just bring it around over the top of itself to create this loop. And I want to then bring it down to the size that I want it to have. And this is then just going to sit on the other side of the prong. And just smooth out the wire a bit. So I think something a bit like that looks pretty good. You can then enlarge it a bit if you want to, or make it smaller depending on how you want yours to look. So just leave it there for now. Then of course we need to do the same on the other side. Everything I'm doing on one side, I'm going to also do on the other side. So we obviously get that more or less mirrored image as much as we can. So bring the wire over the top of itself and back around to create this loop, kind of a bit organic loop. And then the kind of most important or trickiest part can be a little bit as we're moving down and creating the other side, is to obviously get it as close to the first one as possible, to make them as similar as possible. So for instance here I can tell that this side that I'm currently working on, the loop just needs to be a bit smaller and just move position just a little bit to match the other side more. Just like to kind of smooth my way out as I go. And then I also like to move my piece around and kind of look at it from different angles. It gives you a better impression, I find. So it's getting there, but I feel it just needs to move a little bit more. Maybe just a tad bit smaller. Now what I also find can help a lot is if I use a tool, I tend to really use my tweezers and nose pliers most often, because even though you're thinking that's weird, it's a flat tool but it's working with curves, so obviously we don't want to use a flat tool to kind of flatten out the wire. But I do find that it works better than, say, using some round nose pliers, because they more tend to grip onto the wire and kind of maybe damage it a bit, whereas these, the trick kind of is to just not squeeze too tight, but just to kind of grab onto the wire gently, and then you can help move anything or maneuver anything, as opposed to, obviously, if you squeeze too tight, that will kind of make that piece of wire straight. So I'm using tweezer nose or flat nose pliers, but gently, and I find that works the best. Let's just have a look, see where we're at. If we're getting there, I think we more or less are. So, and also I find them really handy for when, if you made a loop here and you're struggling a bit to maybe make it smaller, These are really handy for actually making the loop smaller, to kind of squeeze the sides, just to help adjust the size of the loop. But anyway, that's obviously if you need to. So I actually feel like I just need to just open it up a little bit more. Something roughly like that. It's a little bit better. Then we move on to the next one. So again, I'm just moving back to the other side. I kind of find it's literally just pure habit. It's not, doesn't matter at all. You could then continue on this side, but I just kind of like starting on this side and using that as the guide to the other side, but that's just personal preference. Then here, I'm having the wire come further out towards the frame and then creating another loop, but this time the loop is going to be pointing in the other direction, so in towards the middle of the piece, or you could say towards the other side. So bring it kind of to the place where we want it, more or less in the middle, roughly. And then bring the wire around, back on itself. Create a nice little circle shape or loop shape like this. Smooth that the wire. So I think that's pretty good. Then, of course, we gotta repeat on the other side. So bring the wire around and back on itself. Try and get it in that same position if you can, as much as possible. And then obviously also then the size of the loop matching the other side. Then next, moving back to the first side, I want to create a loop down here, still kind of on this side of the prong, but more or less right up against the prong, a bit like that very first one that we did. So just bring the wire around gently. All the way back on itself. As you can see as well, I'm working my way downwards from the top of the pendant towards the bottom there, because then at the bottom as well I'm going to finish off the wires. That's kind of what we're working our way towards. Obviously adding in that embellishment along the way. So just make it a little bit smaller. Have a little look, and then obviously you can see your wire might want to kind of open up a bit or jump out a bit, but just kind of push it down to where it would sit flat against the stone in the frame, because obviously that's where it will be once we finish it off, fasten it fully in place. So I think that's going to look pretty good. Of course we need to do the same on the other side. So just checking for like how it looks and pushing the wire down tight against the stone or the frame, because this is how it's going to end up sitting. So I'm pretty happy with that, I think. So really all that's left to do now is do what you could call the final loop down here. It's literally just more a loop that we can use to fasten our wire with. So again, just that one on one side, and this is going to be quite a small one. Don't want it to be too obvious or anything. So I'm just gonna, this is just going to be the same direction of loop as the one we just did before, and it's going to sit just on the other side of the prong, and kind of try and make it as small as you can, but still have just a little bit of space so we can get some weaving wire through a couple of times, because like I said, it's this loop I'm going to use to then fasten this whole embellishment piece in place. So something a little bit like that. So now I just need to finish off the excess of the base wires here. So I'm going to take my flush cutters and cut off the excess. So the very end of the wire, it completes the loop that we made, and it's going to basically butt up against the side of itself to complete the loop. That's what I'm aiming for. So something around here, cut off the excess, and then if I just take my tweezers here and flatten it down, you'll be able to see that it creates that full loop still, but the end of the wire is butting up against the side of itself, so that gets rid of the end, as in it's not sticking out so it can catch or scratch on anything. Like that, and just finish off the other side in the same way. So this side is now ready to be attached, but before I do that, I like to just flip my piece around and also create the embellishment on the back, and then I'm going to just attach them all at the end. Obviously it's up to you how you want to do that, but I'm going to take then my 2 wires at the back here, the 2 base wires, because obviously those are the ones we're going to use to create this embellishment, and I'm just going to separate them as well to go towards opposite sides. And remember, again, here on the back we do also have the hole, obviously, and I also like to try and make sure to cover that. So again, this is just what I'm doing for this design. You can play around with it yourself, but what I'm going to do is, again, one side at a time, but I'm going to start adding a curve kind of right at the end of the prong, a bit below the prong there, and I want to create a loop here like I was doing the loops on the front, but I'm making sure I'm doing it around the area where that hole is. Bring it all the way around back on itself. So we get something roughly a bit like that. And then I'm just going to leave that there for now. Then I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. So bring it around back on itself. Create this loop. Try and get it as symmetrical as possible with the other side, position wise and size wise. Just need to bring it up a little bit more, I think. And that way, again, using pliers can be helpful with that. Just help roll it. I'm not squeezing tight again because that would straighten out this part of the wire and obviously mess up the loop that we're trying to make. But something a bit like that. Bring it further around, and then just like on the other side, before I go too much further, I like to just kind of have a look, and there, instantly I can actually see I made that too small, so I just want to open that up again, just to try and make it match the other side more. So have a little look. That helped a little bit, but I think it's still just a little bit too small. So just keep, obviously, kind of fixing anything as you go, maneuvering things. Rather you find, say, this out, that I discover that that's a bit too small compared to the other one. Now where you can actually fix it, as opposed to, say, you go further down, you maybe finish it off and then you realize, because then you can't really do anything about it. But then moving on from that, I'm going to then again go back to the side, and then I'm going to just bring it, make sure it has a nice curve to it, and bring it over towards the other side. Again, this is roughly about halfway down where it's going to be crossing over the middle there. Something a bit like that. And then the other side, of course, replicate, do the same thing. Make sure it gets a nice curve along the side, and it crosses over the other way we just brought over, cross over in the same place there, and you can actually see this kind of creates a bit of a heart shape, which is then part of the embellishment on the back here. And you can then see as well that these 2 loops that we did at the top are kind of placed so they help cover up that hole. But then what I want to do is come back again the other way as we're moving down towards the bottom here, same principle as the front. Again, creating a large curve, coming all the way down towards the bottom of the frame, because down here is also where we then just want to add some loops, because we can then use them to attach to the frame, because we need those loops to securely fasten it. On the other side, bring that back around as well. That large curve, try and get it as symmetrical as possible. Now this one I actually like to cross the opposite way to where they crossed, the way they crossed there previously. So that means the one that was below will now go over, the one that went over will be the bottom one. That's just personal preference really. So the crossing over here, kind of right in between the prongs. And then just take a bit of time and just have a look and see if you're happy with how all your wires are sitting, because I want to do that before we create the loops on the bottom here and obviously finish them off as well. So just make sure that everything is how you want it. And then when you're happy with it, it's time to just do the final little loops down here, right at the bottom. Same principle as the front. Just put your thumb over the wires to hold everything in place. And we just need to make a few quite small loops here. Just enough so we can get a weaving wire through a couple of times to be able to finish off. Of course, we're going to do both of them. So bring the wire around and back on itself and create two similar loops down here. Make this one a bit smaller to match the other one. Get it into position. You can kind of see they're going to sit just right next to each other there at the very bottom. And otherwise, same principle. When you made your loops, cut off the excess. But so we're left with the wire completing the loop, but butting up against the side of itself when we flatten it down. And then we can always tighten up the loop a little bit here if we need to. Other side. Cut that off. Flatten it down. And then again, just tighten up the loop so it kind of closes it more. There we go. So basically the embellishment of the front and the back is now ready. So all that's left to do is attach them. And this is where I'm going to be using the 0.3mm wire. So just slightly thinner than the 0.4mm. But you could easily use a 0.4mm if you don't have this. But the reason that I'm using this is just because it is slightly finer and I'm just finishing off the piece now. So I don't want it to stand out too much, but also because the loops that we made right at the end where we want to attach, they are quite small. So just to make sure I don't run out of space. But like I said, you can easily use the 0.4mm if you want to. And I've cut a short little length just of about 20 centimeters or so. It's literally just enough to kind of work with and have something to grab onto. Then I have 4 loops I need to finish off. They're all the same principle, so I'm just going to show you on one. So I'm just going to start here. I'm just putting the end of my 0.3mm wire through the loop because I just want to attach it first of all. So I'm just going to kind of hold on to a little tail here with my thumb. Just bring it through and then just attach it by going through the loop again, wrapping it around basically the wire, the base wire, a couple of times, just like you would do anywhere else. So a couple of times like that. I think I'll just do one more. So I'm wrapping it around. So far I've done 3 here. And again, just make sure that the wraps are pretty nice and close together. And then just leave this tail for now. It helps to kind of hold on to it. And then I'm just pushing these wraps just kind of up towards the prong more or less a little bit. And then currently I have the weaving wire here coming from below the loop and then outward and around. So that means I now want to basically wrap around the frame because that's how we're going to attach them together. So that means it's coming up through. So I'm going to go down as if I was going to go down through the loop, but now I'm doing it around the frame instead. So it is kind of a little bit like a figure of 8 weave like we did in the bail, just only once here. And tighten that. And then I always like to make sure to go around at least one more time in the frame, just to get that security. Just get this wire out the other side so I can grab onto it. So again, I'm wrapping around the frame again. Tighten that. Now if you got no space, you could always do an extra time. Otherwise, I then come back to the loop because I want to kind of not just do one connection, you could say. I'm coming now back to the loop. Again, it's coming up through, up between the two, so that means I need to go down through the loop just to follow that pattern. Like that. Because that also really helps fasten it nicely in place by just going this extra time. And again, make sure you go around a few times. Not just once, because that wouldn't be enough to kind of hold it. You need to just wrap around a few times here. And then push them together. So we started out on the loop, wrapped a few times, and then went to the frame, wrapped a few times, and then back to the loop and wrapped a few times. So that's a pretty nice and secure connection there. And that's how I like to do it. Obviously we also do have limited space. But then all that's left to do is finish off the ends. So I'll just show you that as well. I've got my end down here that I was using. It's wrapping around the wire in the loop. So what I'm going to do is just follow the direction that it's wrapping around, and it's also almost as if I was going to do another wrap, but instead of bringing the wire through, I'm going to cut off the excess, making sure I just leave a short little tail. You can maybe see it there sticking out. And then I take my tweezer nose and basically force that little tail into the middle of the loop and tuck it away. And that completely gets rid of it, so we don't have to worry about it catching or scratching. Again, the same with the other one. Just figure out where it is and where it's coming, what direction from. Bring it around as if it was going to wrap around another time, but then just cut off the excess instead. And make sure to tuck away the end. And kind of continue it in the direction that the wrap is going. So there we go. That's now secured this side of the embellishment in place. As you can see, it doesn't move around now at all. So just secure it right there at the bottom. Of course, do the same with the one on the other side. So the front is secured. Flip it around and also do the back ones. And then you'll have your complete pendant. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial for this Fancy Prong Set wirework pendant. And of course I showed very specifically how to make it with this size and shape of stone, but you can easily customize this to loads of other sizes and shapes as well. Just remember to account for the measurements. And of course, don't forget to check out the description box below the video with any useful links. And if you like wirework pendants, I have loads more on my YouTube channel, so please feel free to check that out. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.